It is.
Increase my faith.
And especially, like we said, in going through these studies, it's very easy to go through it and it's like, oh yeah, that sounds like so-and-so. Yeah, this section, it ought to really be hitting brother what's-his-face. No, no, no. Stop looking at others. Stop being a Peter. And it's like, Peter, you put yourself here. It's talking about you.
I just wanted to comment that I had been reading a commentary, and with regard to Matthew 18 and what we're talking about, the forgiveness, and then correlating that back to Matthew 5:23 and 24, that if you remember you've offended your brother, leave your altar and then go.
Mm-hmm.
And the commentator was making the application that let's get this worked out. Whoever the party is, let's either go to one another to get this worked out so that a bigger problem doesn't
That's right. That's right.
blow up from it.
So as we're here in Matthew 18, we don't need to forget where we came from. How important is all this? Just as Jamie mentioned, go back to Matthew 5. You don't even go and worship before you go and fix it. And even then, so like we're saying, as we're looking at this, there could be something there or could be nothing. All of this is preventative medicine. Ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. The whole thing is you're not wanting to allow yourself to get sick so as to have to go to the doctor and get on some type of medicine. Do what you can to keep sickness away. And that's what this is doing. All of this is designed to get us to look inward. So yeah, agree with that 100%. Anything else? All right. You in Matthew 18? All right. Go ahead and read. We're going to read all of this together before going in and breaking it down. Matthew 18:23 to the end of the chapter.
Can I switch to New King James
I guess.
all the way?
Yeah.
To the end, starting with verse 23.
Yep.
Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all he had, and that payments be made. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. But that servant went on and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay you all. And he would not, but he went and threw him into a prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw that what had been done, they were very grieved and came and told the master all that had been done. Then his master, after he had called him, said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant just as I had pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. So my heavenly Father also will do to you, to each of you, from his heart. Hold on, let me start over. So my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses.
Peter raised the question, and this parable is given. The parable is given so as to illustrate and to show the state of man in the sight of God. That when it comes to Peter, how much God has forgiven you, And if we remember this and we recognize this and acknowledge this, then what kind of attitude should we have towards others?
Poor in spirit.
Poor in spirit, mercy. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven, the church, likened unto a certain king which would take account of his servants. So as you can tell with this, God is watching what we're doing, and He's taking account of what we're doing. And when He had begun to reckon, one was brought unto Him which owed Him 10,000 talents. Now I didn't check the date as to when this calculation was made, but 10,000 talents in silver is going to be around $161 million. Now, you take into consideration inflation that we're suffering with right now, I'm sure that's going to cause it to skyrocket. But whatever the amount is, the illustration, the idea is an amount that could never be paid. That's where this servant is. You have a debt that there's no possibility, no way in this world you will pay it back. He was bankrupt. Now we are thinking about this in comparison to our relationship with God. With that in mind, what is his only possible way of escape? It's right here in verse 25. But for as much as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him, or excuse me, we're not there yet, commanded him to be sold, his wife and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. That in the sight of God, we are bankrupt, poor in spirit. Matthew 5:3. Have nothing to pay to atone for our sins. And that we know it. So this is how it would be for us if God said at any point, okay, Micah, you need to pay up for your sin. And here's what you owe. All I could do is stand there with my pockets turned out. I don't have anything. And even the little bit that I do have is not measurable to that. I mean, what did Jesus say in Matthew 16? What's the value of a soul?
More than the world?
More than the world. That even if somehow I could get in control of all of this and try to give that back over to God to atone for my sin, it wouldn't amount. It would not equal. So again, we have illustrated for us the great weight of sin. Just how bad is sin? Not only is it causing me to suffer, him to be sold, what about my wife? What about my children? Sin does not stay with the one that's committing it. It ripples out and it affects everybody. What does sin cost? More than the world. And everybody suffers. So what is the only option that this type of person has when they recognize this? The servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. What else could this fellow do? And this is what we have seen with every single person that Jesus has helped up to this point. The lepers, the centurion, Peter's mother-in-law, the woman that her daughter had died, the men letting the paralytic man through the roof, falling down and worshiping, pleading, have patience with me. Have mercy on me. And this lesson is for the apostles. Do not think that just because you are working with me, that you are above this. Peter, do not get so high on your own supply that just because I've called you to start following me, that you are all of a sudden above needing God's forgiveness. If anything, with you being in your position and seeing all of these people and how much they need God, that should humble you to where you fall down and you plead before God that you need His help. But then also taking into consideration that this is what your work is. Evangelism is helping people, serving people to get them here to where they will recognize their need, poor in spirit, and what it is that God is requiring of their sins, and that they will come and that they will follow. That what we are involved in is involved in serving one another. And that in serving one another, what am I going to see? I'm going to see your weaknesses. I'm going to see your frailties. And you know what? That is going to help me to be compassionate. But if I don't see that, if I don't see your frailties and your imperfections, I'm not busy in serving, then what happens to compassion? What happens to forgiveness? It won't be there. Verse 27, then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion and loosed him and forgave him the debt. This is the same word that's used every time in connection with Jesus helping the multitudes. Matthew 9, he saw the multitude and it says he was moved with compassion. Same word. The bowels, your insides, are being moved by what you're seeing. And that's what's happening with this king. And he loosed him and forgave him the debt. This is how our debt is taken care of. Now, what's the purpose of this? When I am forgiven, forgiveness that is extended to me produces an attitude, this attitude in those that have been forgiven. How do I forgive someone for a lifetime? Understanding this is the only way. That when I put myself in the position of the one needing to be forgiven, and I think about the great amount that God has forgiven me, if God can forgive me, then I can forgive you. But here's where the apostles are. Verse 28. But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence. This is some weak, piddly amount. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me that thou oughtest, or owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. So this parable is used to answer the question asked by Peter. How many times do I forgive? To what amount do I forgive my brother? Well, Peter, take a step back and think about all the times you've been forgiven. And then you apply that over. How do I forgive the way that Jesus forgives? or the way that he says to forgive. Look at this. Took him by the throat. The king did not do that. With all of the money that this servant owed, the king wasn't harsh with him. Didn't take him by the throat, didn't beat on him, did not do anything. But look at what this servant is doing to his fellow servant. Now, why would he do this? You're both servants. But you see, in my mind, this guy's below me. I am thinking of him differently. We're not on the same level. To where, yeah, if I want to come along and take him up by the nape of his neck and get him to pay, then I'll do that. And you can just tell by the illustration. I'm just reading this and really thinking about it. How would this make you feel if you saw this? This isn't right. Shouldn't be doing this. So just look at what happens when we forget about how we've been forgiven. The servant is now doing the same thing the other servant did. Look at this. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him. That's what this guy did to the king. And he found pity. So as this servant is watching his fellow servant fall down, what should he be thinking about? Oh, that was me just a little while ago. But we don't think about that kind of stuff. And he would not. He was not patient with him, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, here are people on the outside, seeing what's happening, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after that he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desirest me. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? Now, why aren't these other servants minding their own business?
Just not right.
This is not just. This is not how you're supposed to be handling your fellow servant. It's not how you're supposed to be handling your brother. Now, when it comes to church discipline and coming to correct a brother, guess how the majority of our brethren go about doing it? They are coming in to chop heads. They are coming in to take somebody by the throat. It's not how you do this. We are looking to restore, not destroy. But if we're going in with the mindset of negativity, that this isn't going to work, this is going to be the only outcome, they're just going to be chased off, you're basically fulfilling your own prophecy. Because if you're going in with that kind of mentality, then you're not going to go in with compassion. If you're going in with hope and faith in what God says, that's going to change the entire mood of the thing. And especially if we are thinking about ourselves. And anybody that has to go into a correction type of situation, what would be a good practice for them to do every time they have to do it is just go ahead and start tallying up all the times that they've had to be forgiven. And then when it comes time to do this, you'll already be in the mindset. We want to forgive. We want to be able to move on. These servants, they saw it, and they were very sorry as to what was happening. They're not being tattletales. They're not being talebearers. That's not the same thing. They did the right thing. Leviticus 5, Leviticus 6, Deuteronomy 19. You see something that transpires that should not transpire and you don't say something about it, you're going to be guilty. Why? Because somebody is in sin. And something needs to be done about it. We cannot turn away from sins that are committed. So here is the crux of the matter, of the whole thing. How can I, a person in need of God's forgiveness every day, be unmerciful to someone else who needs my compassion? If I appreciate God's mercy that He extends to me, then I, under no circumstance, can withhold my mercy from any of you. That's supposed to be easy, not east. But where the problem comes in is it's easy for us to grow into the thinking that what I do earns me God's blessings. And that's never the case. For example, it's easy for a person to look at the collection that we take up every first day of the week and to look at their giving that they put in and how great the amount is, and then walk away and say, all right, then that should earn me a good amount of grace. It's not how grace works. What does what I throw into the collection plate have anything to do with God's forgiving me? Nothing. God's forgiveness is not conditioned by my liberality. In fact, the opposite is true. In 2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 7, the liberality of the Thessalonians grew out of their appreciation of God's goodness. They were a poor church. But when they heard about the destitute situation that Jerusalem was in, and then they thought about how good God had been to them, they begged Paul not to leave them out of the collection. And so it's the same situation for us. I am always unworthy of God's grace. And that when I am mindful of that, then how will I start thinking about you? I'm not above you. You're not beneath me. We are in the same position. You find an unforgiving person, and you have found a person that does not appreciate God's forgiveness. And this is the problem of the people that we're reading about in Matthew. And it's even the problem of people today. And it's the problem that Peter's having at this point. That if I forgive 7 times, then God will not expect any more out of me. That if I can do this 7 times, then Peter will have earned God's favor. And Jesus says no. Peter, you are never in a position where you've earned God's favor. And that's humbling. Verse 33, shouldst not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? Right there is the measure. We forgive the same way God forgives. And that is the reason why the apostles said, increase our faith. His Lord was wroth. Here's the frightening part. Everything that's just been illustrated is what God is also going to do. If we do not truly forgive others, then when I stand before God on the day of judgment, He is going to be wroth, angry with me. And this certainly is applicable for an eldership, deacons, preachers, evangelists, anybody that's going to be in the position of teachers, because it's very easy for people that are in position, that have a little bit of power, that have a little bit of rule, to start taking the rest of the brethren by the throat. And if I'm going to do that with my position, I don't need to be here. His Lord was wroth and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due unto him. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if you from your hearts forgive not every one his brother their trespasses. Matthew 5:7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive or obtain mercy. Shall I go to the judgment, refusing to give mercy to one soul that has pleaded with me for mercy? If I do, I will not find myself in the judgment finding any mercy when I get there. So that ought to be a sobering thought for us to take in. Any church problem, any family problem, any work problem is able to be overcome if we're willing to follow through this process. And then at the end of it, be willing and able to forgive like God forgives. So you just, again, put this into the context of marriage, because that's what's coming up next in Matthew 19. Couples with problems. And they are unable to reconcile, when really the issue is they refuse to reconcile. And then they go on through life with bitter feelings, separated from one another, and then thinking to themselves that they're justified. They need to think about this. So even as we get into Matthew 19, and we start thinking about the one exception to put away a mate, divorce, and to remarry, with this in view, should divorce even be an option? What about the matter of adultery? should there not even be in that offense, in that sin, the ability to forgive and to move on? Yes, there should be. But what is being shown to us in that situation is, you know what, there are some sins in which, okay, I can forgive you, but there's a greater punishment, retribution for a sin like that. To where a husband that commits adultery on his wife, yeah, he can be forgiven. That doesn't mean she has to take you back. And that's just the consequence. But even with that, in rushing into, well, they've done this, therefore they're just done, then you've completely missed what's happened in Matthew 18. You're wanting to say that your forgiveness has reached a limit. And you need to reconsider that. Now, when we put that into play, how difficult is it to forgive like God forgives? That would be very difficult. And thus, when we're thinking about this section, and we have passages like Romans 6:17 that tells us, "But God be thanked that ye were the servants of sin, but ye have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you." That's a pattern that's to be followed. And we've got all forms of pattern that we're following as Christians. There's a pattern for our worship. There's a pattern for salvation. There's a pattern in setting up leadership inside of the Lord's church. And all of that's easy to follow. It's easy to follow those patterns because what is there to lose? What's the cost in following the pattern for salvation or any of those other things? Nothing really. But if we're going to follow this pattern, forgiveness takes sacrifice. So who does this involve? Is there anybody that's left out? No. Is the preacher in this? Yes. The elders and the deacons, are they in this? Yes. Husbands and wives, they in this? Yes. Children and their parents? Yes. So likewise, if ye from your hearts forgive not every one. So with this also means I do not keep a record of these things. Jesus is showing in the forgiveness that's being offered to the wicked servant, the Lord, the King, forgave him everything and let him go. He didn't say, well, I'm going to hold on to this little bit. So Jesus says, as Christians, you do not have a file that's saved over here of everyone's trespasses against you that you get to pull out later and say, oh, you remember when you did this? That's not going on here. And you want a really good illustration as to why it doesn't need to go on here, because that's the kind of stuff that was going on in Virginia. Johnny, my dad, was keeping a record of everybody's trespasses and everybody's sins, so that when the time came and he needed to push somebody back, he could pull that drawer open and pull it out. You remember when you did this? You remember when you did that? And you know what that does? That hurts. All that is deflection from dealing with a present problem. And we can do that with each other. To get the attention off of us and the light off of us, we'll start trying to push it over to the person trying to come and talk to us. That's not how we handle problems. We do not start bringing up ancient history. If there's a present problem, you keep it in the present. And then on top of that, you don't start piling in whatever your problems are. If you have a present problem, then you deal with that present problem. And if you've got another problem, then you deal with that later. Because all that's going to do in piling this up is put them further on the defensive. And now it's just a situation of, well, why didn't you tell me this before? Why are you just bringing this up now when very likely I'm not even in a position to even remember what you're talking about? Present issues, present debts, and they're being wiped clean. To where when we get into the marriage situation, when it comes to husbands and wives and they do things that are agitating, and even to the degrees of, there are actual trespasses. The marriage doesn't just fall apart at every little thing. Because we know trespasses are going to happen. We know offenses are going to happen. And that's why we've been joined together, so we can help each other. Why did we become members of the church? Because I need help. And the day that I forget that, and the day that we forget that, is the day that we're going to lose this. And things are going to crumble. All right. So that's all in Matthew 18. Thoughts, questions, comments on that illustration, parable that's given? As I said when we started this section, this has been the section that helped me the most. Because in being in the position that I'm in, and especially being on television and different things like that, you can get lost in the fact of, well, yeah, I know what the Scriptures say, and I'm just telling you what the Scriptures say. And then you get lost with the motivation. Why am I doing this? Am I just going out to destroy, or is this in an attempt to restore somebody, to be able to gain them back? And it's to help all of us with the things that we do. So there's nothing else.